Hey everybody, this is the Podfather of Gaming, Stephen Buonocore.
And this is Roy Cannady.
Who are you, Roy?
Hey, I am the editor over here at the Dice Tower. I do a lot of board game media. I pretend to design board games and things like that. So I do lots of different
Yeah,
stuff.
he's got a good Euro coming out really soon. But what we're going to be talking about today, though, is, as a lot of you know, my single favorite game in the world, which is War of the Ring. And Roy and I had the opportunity recently, during COVID, we broke and we got together and we played an epically great game, as they all are, of War of the Ring. So,
Listen,
but
I
before
like
we
to
start
think of
talking,
you as part of my small social circle.
that's exactly why we were able to do that. Correct. I'm on the Dice Tower Network, therefore we are together, one social circle. But before we get into the actual play session that we had, let's give you guys a little bit of a background of what is the game War of the Ring for those who don't know. And this will obviously give our perspective on how the game actually stands in the way the game works and the gameplay and how it is in the pantheon of great games out there. So, War of the Ring, from a thematic description, it is a very thematic recreation of the Lord of the Rings, starting at the Council of Elrond and the formation of the Fellowship of the Ring. The actions of the game, in every way, start at that point in the game. We'll talk more about what that means.
Yeah, and it is a two-player game. It can be played three or four as well. But yeah, one player is going to, or at least one side is going to be the Fellowship player, which is going to be like the free peoples. That's basically like the elves and the men of Gondor and the dwarves and all of these different factions. And then you're going to have the Shadow player, which is going to be the Isengard units, the Uruk-hai, and then the Sauron units, all the different orcs, and then the Southrun and Easterlings and things like that, the men that Sauron corrupted and tricked into working together. So you have two different forces opposing each other. On the good side, you're going to be trying to hold on and maybe gain 4 victory points, but more likely than not, you're going to be trying to get the ring and the Fellowship to Mount Doom and be able to cast the ring into the cracks of doom. That's how you win the game. On the dark player's side, they're going to be trying to get 10 victory points. Basically, they had to take over different strongholds and things like that. Or they want to get the ring bearer to 20 corruption, which can be done through all sorts of different ways for hunting for the ring and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's 12 corruption, but that's just a nit.
What did I say?
12 corruption.
20?
You said 20 corruption.
I was thinking 12. That would have made the game a lot easier if it was 20.
Would have made it a lot easier for him, but we'll talk about what happened. And then, and the actual names, by the way, it's the Free People's player, just to use the right things, and that's the good guys, and the Shadow player, and that's the bad guys. So there's the two-player nature.
It's not called just
world.
Evil One. It's actual Shadow player.
And as you can probably tell, I did play the Shadow player because of my nickname. One of my nicknames is the Evil One, and Roy played the Free People player. So how does this kind of work at the start of the game? As I mentioned already, all the actions start at the moment the Fellowship is formed in Rivendell, and that includes all the placement of the units on the board. And you're playing on the entire map of Middle Earth, all the regions that you see in the Tolkien drawings and things like that. And that includes the units that you're putting down are regular units, elite units, which are basically twice as big and good and hardy as a regular unit, and the leaders. And while they don't actually do combat, they give bonuses into your combat as things go on. And we're not going to get into too much detail, but remember there are 3 types of units. The politics of the world begin as they do right there after the Fellowship is formed. And what that means briefly is that the Shadow player nations, the 3 nations that the Shadow player represents, they're all activated. They know what is coming. War is coming. So they're ready to go to war. They're not at war yet, but they're ready to go to war. The Free People's players, nations, are all non-activated, except the elves, because, well, the Fellowship was just there. They are there in Rivendell. Elrond hears this. He puts out the word that war looks like it's coming. They're not at war either, but they are activated. All the other races, Gondor and Rohan and the Men of the North and the dwarves, they're like, yeah, whatever. This stuff's
not a
happening.
big deal. Not a big deal.
He's not around. Sauron, we got rid of him 1,000 years ago. Don't you remember that guy, Isildur? So he's not around. And this is a good time to mention, actually, that neither the shadow player nor the free people's player can bring new units into the game. And that's called mustering until the nation is activated and you bring in units for a given nation and that nation is at war. And both of those things occur by moving the nations down the political track. And that can only occur via essentially aggressive behavior on the part of the shadow player against the free people's player, basically moving into their territory, doing combat and things like that. So as you can get them down there, activate them, bring them to war, all of a sudden you can start bringing in new units. And this is when the craziness and the fun begins.
Yeah, the a whole other side of this. That's the whole like war aspect of it, of like trying to get your guys into war. But there's this whole other side of the game. It's very asymmetrical the way it works, because there's also the whole fellowship trying to get the ring to Mordor. And there's this whole like creeping thing of like when you have character dice, you can end up moving your guys towards Mordor for the fellowship. And each time you do that, the shadow player is going to be able to try to roll dice depending on the number of eyeballs that they're putting towards the hunt. The shadow player has to determine how much they want to be trying to search for the ring itself. And the more they do that, the more chances they are that they're going to find it and be able to corrupt the ring bearer themselves. So it's this whole give and take of like the fellowship trying to get further along the track. And of course, there's lots of different paths you can take. You can go through Moria, but there might be some cards that affect that. Or you might be able to go other ways around the mountains. If you remember in the movies, they were struggling over how do we get around these mountains? It's very thematic in that way. And then once you get all the way to Mordor with the Fellowship, you go onto a new track, which is the Mount Doom track there. And it changes up the rules of the game. Now, every single time you move, the shadow player is going to be pulling tiles from a bag to see how much corruption you take. Normally, only when the shadow player finds you when you're out in the world, they're going to be pulling tiles. But now they're going to do it every single time. And there's a lot of cards and things in the game that can adjust that bag and make it better for the free people or better for the shadow player, depending on how you build that up. And there's this whole other side of the game, which is just about getting the ring to Mount Doom or corrupting the ring bearer.
Yeah, amazing stuff in that way that the theme just unfolds and the way that the books are essentially being done in front of you. And I say the books versus the movie because the movie did take some liberties, but this thing plays like exactly like the books are. And this is a good time. Let me mention the game system, if you don't mind, right now, and the elements that are in this game, and truly makes it amazingly unique for what it is. I describe War of the Ring as an action dice-driven, card-driven war game. And what do I mean by that is each player has a dice pool that they're going to roll each round, and then the facings of those rolled dice give that player the available actions that they have during their turns of that round. And note, the shadow player's dice are different than the free people's dice. They're similar. There are similar actions represented, but they're different. So there's a bigger chance that something happens that I kind of want to have happen versus those creepy little free peoples that they want to have happen. And each player also has a hand of cards. They start with a couple, and they're going to get cards coming into their hands. And these cards, like great modern games, they're multi-use as well. They've got a top portion and a bottom portion. The top portion are actions that will break rules of the game and give you amazing things that'll happen, and the bottom portion are used in the combat portion of the game. So these two things combined together literally make this game just an amazingly great game experience as well as thematic experience, etc. So I think that's a pretty good high-level summary. Anything that we missed there?
I just think it's so interesting the way that the actions and the action dice and the cards work, because you have to play with what you're given. You know, you can play this game 100 times and roll different things on those dice, and it's going to shape your strategy in different ways. You're going to draw different cards that are going to shape your strategy in different ways. So it makes the game very replayable as these things happen each time. I played a game. The last game we played was very different than a game I had played before, just because what I rolled on those action dice and the cards I was given.
No, and yeah, and that is a key point of like of the strategy. You can go in with a certain idea of what you want, but all of a sudden you're given cards that will direct you essentially to choose a sort of a different path. You're always going to have the overarching idea that as the shadow player, I need to get those 10 victory points. and that's basically my main course of victory. Or I can try to seed corruption things, bad things over to the free people into the bag that gets pulled. But those cards that come to me, if all of a sudden it says, you can go muster a whole bunch of guys way in the north and do something like, wow, I can, what, maybe I'll go attack the dwarves instead and screw things up there. So the cards are truly, the part that's going to make this game absolutely different and differently thematic at all times. Pretty good summary, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So what do you think? So let's now get into the actual play that we had. And by the way, it was a great game, and thank you so much for joining me. The first time I had played in about a year. So I was a little rusty. You had played only a few months before that. But I think our rules knowledge was pretty close. You probably had slightly more refreshed rules knowledge than I did. But we got through the game in a good amount of time. This is normally with two people who know the game, it's a solidly 2.5 hour, 3 hour game. Tell me about what your initial thoughts. Like, did you have a strategy that you were going into the game with, and how the beginning of that game went for you? What were your initial thoughts and moves?
I mean, basically every game I play as the free peoples is all about just getting the ring to Mount Doom. It's very interesting how asymmetric the game is, and that is like the fact that it's like just hold on to these strongholds as much as possible, but then get the Fellowship to Mount Doom. The game was very interesting because I didn't really roll many muster dice at all during the beginning of the game, so I wasn't able to get any of my guys even close to at war. I was doing some moving around, and it was very interesting because when we were playing the game, you did something that I hadn't really seen a lot, which apparently you said is a strategy that's normal. People do this all the time. The whole thing of like not putting any eyes in to try to find the ring. And that helps you build up your armies a lot more and get things happening a lot faster. But it allowed me to be like, well, I'm just going to freely walk over to Mordor a little bit easier. It wasn't perfectly easy because I didn't roll quite as many character dice as I would like to. I rolled a bunch of event dice and things like that, which I did utilize with Gandalf's special ability. But there's also so many special abilities in the game and so many things going on. But yeah, I really, I don't really come into with like big overarching strategies when I come to this game, especially as the free people. I just play with what I'm given. I kind of have a little bit of a strategy. I feel like the shadow player can really have those more long-term strategies because it's like, okay, I've got to get these armies all together and get everybody slowly moving across the board. For me, it's like, what dice do I roll? What can I do with those dice that I have? That sort of thing.
Exactly. And just to give some color to people who don't know the intricacies without going into too much detail, what Roy is addressing there is that as the shadow player, I have the ability to how much do I want to hunt? How many of these eye dice do I want to put into the hunt pool? And in the beginning of the game, I was putting 0 in. In fact, I put 0 in that. It's a strategy by a good buddy of mine, Chad McCash, if he's watching, is that you roll so many dice, so many more dice as the shadow player than free people, that on average you should roll at least one eye. But you got lucky. On a number of my rolls, I rolled no eyes, and
I could have gotten luckier if I could have moved faster.
Right. We would have to been a double luck then. I rolled no eye, and you rolled lots of character symbols, and that's the character symbol is one of the symbols on his dice, and on the shadow player's dice as well. So Roy was able to move freely for a while, and probably I might have done it a little bit different, but I still would have put absolutely minimal number of those eyes in there. Maybe when I got extra dice, I might have started definitely adding one in there just to ensure that if once you moved, I'd have a chance of finding you. And when you find them, bad things can possibly happen to the free people. On my side, as the shadow player, the obvious thing to do is kill, right? You just got to get out there and kill things, and you got to get to your 10 victory points, which you get, by the way, by taking over the free people's strongholds, No pun intended there for me. The
That's
strongholds in
right.
the city.
Destroy all
Strongholds
the
are worth
strongholds. Oh,
the
sorry.
strongholds. You got to destroy those things. So the strongholds on Middle Earth are worth 2 victory points, and the cities are worth 1. So you just got to get to 10 in total, and the shadow player will win. And we mentioned that the free peoples can get 4 victory points in that way, and they could win. I've seen that once in my entire
It normally
Lord of the
happens
Rings
because of
career.
mistakes.
And it happens because the shadow player screwed up, and that's when it happened to me. I won't discuss that anymore. But before I started killing things, what I tried to do is to get as many of the additional action dice into play. Now, what does that mean, and how do you do that? All of the characters in the books are represented in the game in one way or another. Specifically for the shadow player, Saruman, the Witch King, and then possibly late in the game, the Mouth of Sauron, can come into play. And when you get them into play, you get yet another die to roll as part of your die pool. Every time you have a die and you roll that thing, you're going to get an action for each one of those dice. Or you can use it to put into the hunt pool to search better for the ring bearer. So my strategy was to get as many of those additional dice. So get Saruman into play, get the Witch King into play, so that I have more dice in my dice pool, more actions. Then, and simultaneously, because of as you're taking actions, you're going to do certain things simultaneously, build up my forces in Mordor, basically, in Isengard quite a bit, and in and the Southrons and Easterlings, build them up as much as possible and start getting them moving, because there are stacking limits in the game. You can't have more than 10 units in any region, so I can't just like build them 30 units and then start marching them. No, so you got to build them, march them a little, build them, get them moving. So get a lot, and then assault the weak points of the free peoples. And essentially the weak points of the free peoples are just like in the books, right? Isengard goes and hits Rohan, takes over Helm's Deep, takes over the other area, which I can't think of its name. Edoras, right? And there's that's 4 victory points right there, in that area. And Mordor, Sauron's Mordor units, and supported by the Southrons and Easterlings, Southrons in this case, they're coming up from the south. They're going to assault Gondor, take that, and then they have an option. Do they go south and get to Peligir?
Yeah.
And then the other place on the
Doth Amrol or something like that.
Doth Amrol, very good, excellent, good memory. I used to know these things like anything. Or do they branch north and start heading toward the elves? And we'll talk about how the game played out. So that was my initial thoughts on what I was going to do. So let me ask you, Roy. So we had our initial thoughts. How do you think the game played out for you? What were those initial actions and the first, 1/3 of the game or half the game? How did it go for you, and what things did you achieve or not achieve that you'd hoped to do?
It was very interesting. So since I didn't really roll much of the muster dice, many of my different alliances weren't reticent to go to war at all. So I couldn't really muster to defend some of the strongholds. I normally really like to defend Gondor, get a couple extra units in there, get a couple extra units in Helm's Deep if there's ways to do that. I try to retreat into Helm's Deep, just like they do in the movies, and try to hold that for a little bit. Because as the free people, you're just trying to hold the shadow player and waste their time for the most part. These places are probably going to fall, and there's going to be multiple waves after waves of bad guys. And if you can somehow make that first wave crack across the stronghold and hold it on, then it delays them so much that you have a lot of time to get that ring to Mordor. I was not very lucky in this. I wasn't able to help defend these places at all. I did get an interesting thing on the fact that Stephen wasn't doing a whole bunch of hunting meant that Gandalf didn't die because of corruption. Normally I let Gandalf die early because of corruption, so I couldn't get Gandalf the White out very easily. But I did break off Aragorn and run him down to Gondor to try to turn its Strider, and then he turns into Aragorn. I was trying to get Aragorn. So I'd rolled some Will of the West and different things early in the game that I'd used to try to push along the Fellowship track. But by the time Aragorn got down there, I stopped rolling Will of the Wests. So I just couldn't get Strider to turn into Aragorn until right before the Mordor units went in there and basically killed him off. So I had like his die for like a turn because by the time I turned him into Aragorn, he was, I think you actually played the Grand card or whatever, which with the Witch King there, and it was so thematic. But this time there was no Gandalf the White to come in and save anybody. They just got swept away.
Yeah, that's so. There's a couple things to mention there is that you mentioned how you get dice into the game. You can get new dice, right? So you can turn Gandalf the Gray into Gandalf the White. But how do you do that? He's got to die.
He has to be dead
So you
first.
sacrifice him, essentially, instead of taking corruption, instead of the ring bearer taking more corruption, you can sacrifice the leader of the party at that time, which is usually Gandalf in the beginning.
Right.
You sacrifice him, he dies. How thematic is that? And then later on, by a card play, you can get Gandalf the White in, and Gandalf the White gives you a die, really good powers and things like that. You can take actions based on his card and things. And you can not kill Strider, but you can run Strider down, and he's fast, that SOB. He can really move fast and try to get himself to Gondor and start like shaking the bells and saying, hey guys, I'm back. And you need to listen to me, and we need to activate, and we need to start getting things going and go to war. You got there, but like literally the turn that you got there, my forces were like doubly like they had already assaulted
Helm's Deep
Orthanc.
and like taken it over.
No.
Well, yeah, you took Orthanc. I think you took Helm's Deep and took that completely, like before I could even mount any sort of defense. And even by the time you took it, like the Rohan units were basically like, I mean, do we really want to go to war? And I'm just like, come on, guys. I couldn't even muster anybody at all. Once you start a siege, you can't bring any more units in. So, like, if you're able to get that siege started before I'm able to muster anybody there, you can really just end up wiping guys out.
And as you said in the previous thing, that there's a card for like every event in the books and everything that happens. And I played the card that says Grand, Hammer of the whatever it's called, and that's the battering ram. That's that huge thing. It's called Grand. And I had that there right after Strider got there. He didn't become Aragorn, so you didn't get an extra die. And I had laid waste to the siege and destroyed Gondor fairly quickly at that point. It was a couple of turns, and I was able to like press the battles even stronger and even harder. And Gondor fell almost as fast.
Normally, each time to keep a combat going, one of the main things for the Shadow player is the fact that like each time there's a siege combat, it ends unless they downgrade one of their elite units into a regular unit. And so you have to have a ton of elite units, and you have to keep downgrading them to be able to wipe out those strongholds. But the Grand card just lets you just keep going without downgrading.
Go. And So another brilliant mechanic of the game, and so thematic, and it works that you want to keep pressing the attack. When one of your big units becomes a small unit, basically you lose a hit point. Let's call it in your army, just to keep doing it. Well, because you're attacking castle walls and they're throwing rocks at you and things. So it's a very thematic way of seeing that the siege just continues if you can afford to do that. And that's why when it's a siege and the good guys always go into the stronghold, the bad guys better have a lot of guys and backups, and they have to keep bringing them there to keep attacking. This is also a really good time to mention the fact that if any of the Shadow players' units get killed, they can come back.
Yep.
They just go to a pile of units, and I can recruit them, muster them back in. The Free People's units are dead. Dead, very dead, go back into the box dead. So they have a very finite, limited number of units. This is a decent amount. But if you use all, I'm going to make up a number, if you use all 30 units of Gondor, you have no more left for the game.
I'm about to say,
and you just
30 is pretty high for the number of
it's probably closer to 20, right?
Yeah, so, it's not that many.
And even less for Rohan, and probably around the same.
Yeah, Gondor's
for
definitely
elves,
the biggest too.
And yeah, and they're the biggest, and the dwarves are probably the small dwarves, and the men of the north are the smallest.
Yep.
So your beginning of the game was looking a little bleak, and I think it's a good time, and I'm gonna be fair to you. I'm gonna be fair to you that your dice weren't good in combat, right? Your dice weren't good. Your dice were good on mostly good on the action dice that you're rolling, but your combat dice, which are different, they're just d6s. Um, you were not rolling quite as well as me, but I was coming in
I
with like
yeah, I
full
think
dice. Like I was
it
always
was
rolling the full amount of dice.
yeah, I think it was more or less the fact that I didn't necessarily want to hit. I just didn't want you to hit. And the fact is that
Yeah,
you were rolling quite well. I would have liked to have taken out some of your units to thin down the amount of dice you're rolling, but you had definitely prepared and brought enough units to where you're going to be rolling 5 each time. I was lucky if I was rolling 4, 3,
right.
2 each time one of my units is dying. But if I could get lucky enough for you to just whiff some rolls, then you'd have to downgrade elite units and things like that. But they were doing pretty good, and of course there was lots of modifiers going on, and the Witch King helped that out, being able to play a combat card and redraw combat cards,
Yes.
that sort of stuff. There's so many things that there's a lot of randomness in those dice rolls, but there's a lot of things that can mitigate it, and properly preparing can make that stuff happen.
Yeah, and it's a good time to mention again. We're not going ultra deep into the game mechanics, but when you are in combat, the max doesn't matter how many units you have, and it's always 10 is the maximum number of combat units because that's the stacking limit. 10 actual units, either irregular or elite. The maximum number of combat dice you can ever roll is 5, and then after the combat roll, both players do that. Then there is a leadership roll, and leadership rolls can never be more than 5 as well, and that's where those leader units come in. For the shadow player, the leaders are usually Nazgul. The Nazgul are with them, and the Witch King is a Nazgul. And for Isengard, it's their wargs are considered leaders as well. There's some rules around that. And for the free people, you have actual leader units, and you also, of course, have, if Strider is there, you get instant huge amounts of leadership. You get like 3 extra leadership just for him. But 5 is always the maximum you can roll on combat dice, and 5 is the maximum re-roll. It's called the leadership re-roll that you can get for leaders.
Yep. And you can just re-roll each of those dice like one time, and there's a lot of cards that can affect things with those re-rolls. There's so many ways that are interesting to mitigate stuff like that, but you still have to get lucky and hope that your opponent doesn't roll super well in those rolls. So
Yeah, exactly. So I think the early part of the game was definitely favor shadow player. Me.
it was very
Right?
interesting because it was definitely you were doing extremely well on taking strongholds. Like it was quick, and I'm trying to
Yes.
slow you down. I wasn't slowing you down. Like all my units were just speed bumps. You're just like doot 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 doot. They weren't even very big speed bumps. They were just tiny speed bumps.
I was
But
accomplished. I was accomplished. Go ahead.
I was getting extremely far towards getting to Mordor as well. So I was stressed out. I was like, he needs to slow down, but also I'm almost to Mordor at the same time, you know?
Roy was all stressed. He was like, no. We were playing a really level-headed, strategic with tactical, points to the game. We both were doing that, and we had visions on what we were trying to do. You were moving very effectively, and I was very effective.
Yeah.
The mid game, right? So in the mid game, the game changes, and I've taken now effectively 6 points in victory points in strongholds. And I had to make a turn. I had to decide which way I was going to go at that point. Do I take the forces and go to the south, go toward Peлагir and Dal Amroth, as you mentioned, or do I go up and attack the elves? And I didn't really show my hand too much until all of a sudden, because you had a bunch of units out there like still in Rohan that I'm like, I can't let these guys hang around. So I kind of sent some forces there to attack them. But my thought was, but I got to go north here because I don't have enough victory points in the south to do it all. So I better go and get the elves. And the elves were not at war yet, so they can't add people. They couldn't get there. So I was in good shape to go get them before they built up too much. What was your thought sort of in that mid-game section?
It was very much like I was hoping to find more cards. Sometimes you can find cards that'll allow you to reinforce some of these different areas. I did find some, but like I reinforced like Rivendell. Like I don't think the Moria guys are going to attack Rivendell. But I was like, man, I really need to reinforce a lot of these areas. And there was a point where you were marching towards Lorien. I knew it was happening there, and I feel like I ended up being able to get a couple extra guys there based off of just being right there on the edge of that war and then making it happen. And it took you a little while. I remember you started a siege on Lorien and then got some more units in and then had to start another siege after that. But then you took over Lorien too, and it was right there on the edge. And I think at that point I had gotten the Fellowship to Mordor as well, and it was just like a ticking clock in between both of us.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Like so I was obviously at that point going north. Lorien fell, and right, and then I moved toward Rivendell, and it certainly looked, depending on what I think you thought I was going after Rivendell at that point, but my thought was, and I knew that I was at this point I was actually running out of time because you had moved so efficiently and you had gotten to Mordor. I saw that that's going to be a hard battle. I can now go toward it's the men of the North's area and the dwarves.
Yeah,
I can go attack
Lake Town
those.
and Erebor or whatever
Right,
were the
and I
other
forgot
ones
what
you could
it's not
take.
called Lake Town on the map. Is it called? It's not called. It's where Bard
Dale.
comes from, but is it
It's
called
the same
Dale?
thing.
Yeah. So
yeah, Dale's the
I
name
can
of
go
Lake Town.
through.
So
I can go hit Dale, and and from the east, I had this decent amount of forces that were part of the Easterlings, Southron and Easterlings, but these are the Easterlings.
and you got a card that lets you put a bunch
force.
more there.
And I think I dropped 5 guys into that area all of a sudden, and it was sort of endgame, and all of a sudden, you kind of looked at that and was like,
I was just like sweating, and like
what are those guys doing? What are these guys doing? Where are they going all of a sudden? And I needed 3 more victory points at that point.
The crazy thing is,
I
made it all the way to Mordor with no corruption. I had gone up in corruption, but then I had healed some corruption off. I made it into Mordor with 0 corruption. Gandalf had died on the trek trying to get there. I had sacrificed him for corruption. He had come back in Fangorn. And actually, a thing to note is I had actually taken out Sauron with the Ents because I played the card and killed off, and that made you lose a die, which was
Saruman. You killed off Saruman. I lost a die for that. That's correct. And that actually is a really important point of the game. You got to Mordor to the first step, and you had 0 corruption at that point of the game, and that now you have 5 move. If you can move 5 times and not get up to 12 corruption, you win the game. And at that point, when you did, I think, did you get there and then get rid of the corruption, or right before you got there, you played a card, got rid of all the corruption, then you stood on that first step? Had to be.
I had gotten rid of the corruption like on the way. I had like a card like Bilbo's Song or something like that. And I just kept it down, and I had made sure to sacrifice. I think I had sacrificed Gandalf and maybe Boromir, but I got there with like Legolas, Gimli, Merry, and Pippin all still part of the Fellowship, which if you play the game a lot, you know that you can sacrifice these guys to like not have corruption once you're like going through this different stuff, now that you're going to be drawing tiles. But it was kind of interesting because all the eyeballs that you had drawn before went back into the bag, and then we each had a couple tiles that went into the bag as well. I had some really good tiles, like one that had a 0 and one that had like a 1 corruption on it, and you put another eyeball one in there and like one that let you roll a dice, and both of those kind of stopped movement as well. So it was kind of even on the amount of tiles you put in there. I think you ended up putting one in later as we were like near the edge. But then you shifted your entire strategy as far as searching goes.
Exactly. So let me get to that in a second. But when you got to the first step of Mount Doom with 0 corruption, and I saw that I had, and I was counting. I'm like literally counting. I'm like, okay, I'm going to attack them, and I'm counting the number of actions I need, and the amount of like wins I have to do, and I'm like, holy crap, I'm going to lose this damn game. It's like almost no way that I can take all of this, or you're going to take 12 corruption on the way up there.
I was in really good shape.
At that point, I was like, damn, he did a great job. And I was like, in my head, I was like, effing Roy, he did a great job of getting there, no corruption, and he's going to run. Now he's going to run this thing. Boom, I'm done. But now you had a really seriously amount of bad luck. I think this was a true amount of bad luck where I had seeded the bag. This is the corruption bag where now every time he moves, I get to pull a tile out and do something on there. Sometimes those things aren't bad for the free peoples, but quite a bit.
Most of the time they are.
And I had right, and most of the times they are. And I had put more bad, a little bit more, like one extra tile that was bad than you had put in that was good into that bag. I then pulled every time you moved 5 times. And of course, because you have to move 5 times. Sometimes you don't get to move after a pull, which is bad. I pulled of the 6 tiles, I think in total that I was able to pull, 5 of them were eye tiles. And when you pull an eye tile, the number of dice in the hunt pool is the amount of corruption that the free people takes. And of course, I completely changed the strategy, which is not changing the strategy. It's just the way that you have to do that. At that point, you have to sacrifice all the actions that you have, or quite a few of the actions you have, to take X number of dice, as many as you can put, 4 dice, 5 dice sometimes. You put them in the hunt pool, and you hope, boom, an eye comes out, and then the ring bearer is going to take 4 or 5 corruption. And then the ring bearer is going to have to sacrifice. He's going to sacrifice Legolas for 2, and then he's going to have to take the rest. And Gimli for another 2 and take the rest. He's going to have to sacrifice all of his people, and you did, but I pulled 5 eyes of the 6 pulls, I think.
And majority of the time you had 5 eyes in your pool, so I was taking 5 damage. 3 is normally the bag has 3 as the highest number corruption tile, and then there's these eyeballs that could happen once you're there that could be above 3. So like normally you're thinking, oh, there are lots of 2s. I mean, there's several 3s, there's some 2s, there's like a couple 1s, and then I had put like a 0 in the bag as well. So there were chances I could get very low things. That did not happen at all. I didn't draw a single good tile out of that bag.
And you did not. So that was a bit of definitely a bit of bad luck. You died on the second to final step of Mordor, so you were really close. And that's sort of a good time to bring up the point that this game just always ends like in that moment of like, I'm just about to get and dunk the ring as the free people's players, or the bad guys are just about to take that last stronghold. It always hinges on that last bit. This game was going to end one way or another on the dice that were in front of us at this moment, or maybe one more roll and those dice. So it was really just really, really tight at the end. And you died on the second to last step. How do you think you played? Do you think you played the game well? Would you have done major things different? Anything like that?
I maybe should have tried to muster some of my guys so they were closer, to be able to recruit just a little bit of guys like in Helm's Deep, or a little bit of more guys in, just to slow you down in the early game. But a lot of that was just me trying to press my advantage while you weren't doing eyeballs to get there. And I don't know, there was not a whole lot I could have done because the pressure was on as you were marching up towards my other strongholds to win the game. So I just had to like press the advance, like just keep moving. And I got really unlucky because also when the fellowship becomes revealed, there's a lot of these tokens you'll pull out of the bag. They'll say, oh, reveal the fellowship. They can't move again until you unreveal them. You have to spend another character die to flip them back over. So it's just so many actions on my part. Like, I mean, it's very thematic, just like the movies, like right there at the very edge. It's just like the ring becomes so heavy and like you can't really carry it. I needed a card that's like, you can't carry the ring, I'll carry you. And then Samwise comes out and drags him up to I think there's cards that do that sort of thing too. So
it's just absolutely amazing how the game plays out. Now, obviously, in the movies, in the books, the free peoples have to win. It's just right. I mean, they will win. That's the way the book is written, and of course they will.
I do want to say in the movies, Frodo got corrupted right at the edge of Mount Doom. Anyway, I mean that's how it happened in the movies. So.
Yeah, that's right. He saw the same thing happen, but then, but it really just plays out. You have to have a balanced game, right? So the free peoples have to win as many times as the shadow player wins, and it really is amazingly balanced for all of these very high level mechanics. And and the fact that the game can play so many ways, but to the credit of these amazing designers of this game, again, my number one game, and nothing's going to replace it on thematics and mechanics and experience for me. The game just is amazingly plays out just amazingly. I think that we have to schedule another time to play this game. That's like the last thing I'm going to say, because, and I think that, and if anybody is still watching after 45 minutes of us pontificating about this, I think you can probably tell that while Roy is as passionate about this as I am, but I wanted to give the viewers a sense of how this game plays out. So I'm not being the silly Buonocore, and I'm not trying to like trash talk or anything here with Roy here, because the game is just so good and it just so stands on its own merits and is amazing. So Roy, in the end, when are we playing again?
Hopefully soon. I was talking to you. It would be great because we play with just the core stuff. We did play with your awesome blinged out collector's edition, which is always an amazing experience. But I have just the regular game, and honestly, I do want to say I know the collector's edition is hard to get. If you're excited about this game at all, you can get that regular version, and it plays the same way, and it's still extremely enjoyable. You'd have to do painstaking painting for a long time to make it look as good as Buonocore's, but the gameplay is still there, and it still creates those epic moments. And that's the thing that this game does is, it's hard to make a game that feels epic in a short amount of time. So this game is longer, but it's worth it every time you get it to the table.
Yeah, we just spoke about it, like I said, for 45 minutes about the session, and it creates these wonderful, lasting memories and things like that, and things that you look back on for years. Do you remember that time where you got there with zero corruption, but yet I pounded you with corruption until I killed you at the second to last step of Mordor and things like that? But I think that kind of wraps us up. I don't want to keep us too long and go on, but. Roy, thank you for recapping this with me. I've spoken about the game so much. I wanted to get a recent play out there so that fans of the Dice Tower and the Podfather can go out and listen to us passionately talk about how wonderful this game is and about our recent experience about the game. So thank you for doing that. And we'll schedule a game real soon. Maybe we'll even do some taping of the game. Maybe we'll live stream it. It won't be quite as interesting to watch for 3 hours, but I think it could be pretty cool to do some of that.
Listen, I need somebody watching live that can wish some extra luck on my tile pools. Come on, people. I need somebody to root for me. Steven's evil enough as it is.
I think we'll get some play. I think we'll get some of those. All right. So thank you again, everybody who is listening to this. Appreciate you hanging with us. I'm Stephen Buonocore, the Podfather.
I'm Roy Cannady at the Dice Tower.
And have fun gaming. I can use Tom's line.